The story everyone thinks they know might just be missing the most important part. 2 minutes. That's all the time frame that changed everything. For Lil Durk, those moments weren't captured in the headlines. They weren't in the flashy thumbnails. They were in what was not shown. The FBI's version of the events? It's out there. But what if they left 120 seconds out of the public record? What if those missing minutes hold the key to the real narrative, the one the headlines are too afraid to print? Back in Chicago, when the cameras stopped rolling and the quiet swept over the scene, that's where the story began to split. One version says Durk was simply there. The prosecution story says something else. But fans and insiders keep pointing to the blank spots. The footage cut off when the angle changed, the timeline that jumps, the interview transcript that stops mid-sentence. 2 minutes of silence can reveal more than hours of testimony. What happened during those minutes? Who walked out of frame? Which hand dropped away? And did someone pressure the FBI or the local investigations to seal those minutes from a story? If you're paying close attention, you'll see how the missing time correlates with allegiance, fear, and survival. Because in this world, being silent isn't safe, it's strategic. Tonight, we're peeling back the official statement, the indictment, and the snippets of video that did emerge. We're diving into what the FBI didn't publish, the breaks in the timeline, the witness who went quiet, the phone that went dark. We're following the 2-minute gap that haunts the case of Lil Durk. And in those minutes lie questions of loyalty, law, and legacy. This isn't just about one rapper or one investigation. It's about how truth is shaped by what we're shown and what we're never allowed to see. Get ready for the other side of the story, the side the agency left on pause. Because sometimes the missing footage... Welcome to Rap Shock. Every story has a beginning, but some stories begin with what's missing. In Lil Durk's case, it wasn't a lyric, it wasn't a verse, it was 2 minutes. 2 minutes of security footage that vanished. 2 minutes that changed everything the FBI claimed to know. When the world first heard about Lil Durk's connection to an Atlanta shooting back in 2019, headlines spread faster than the truth. The rapper, real name Durk Derek Banks, was accused alongside his friend King Von in what prosecutors described as an armed robbery and attempted murder outside the Varsity, a famous restaurant near downtown Atlanta. It sounded like a scene straight out of a movie, a late-night confrontation, gunfire, a victim wounded, and 2 rising stars allegedly caught in the chaos. But even as details came out, something didn't fit. There was footage, security video from that night, that supposedly showed the moments before and after the shooting. But here's the catch. When that footage was shown in court, there were 2 minutes missing. 2 minutes where the screen went black, where timestamps jumped, where motion simply froze. The FBI's version of the file skipped ahead, and no one ever publicly explained why. At first, fans dismissed it as a technical glitch. But as time went on, insiders, lawyers, and street reporters began to whisper. What if those 2 minutes contained a truth that could clear Durk's name or expose something deeper? The official report painted a clean picture. Durk and Vaughn arrived at the scene. An altercation occurred, shots were fired, and Durk was implicated because of surveillance, eyewitness accounts, and social media posts. But when independent analysts reviewed the footage frame by frame, the timeline didn't add up. In the original timestamp, the argument began at 5:45 a.m. The next frame jumped to 5:47 a.m., skipping everything in between. And yet, so how can a crime take place inside a space of time that doesn't exist on video? That's where the mystery began. Durk's lawyers immediately called it out. They claimed the footage had been edited or mishandled before it reached court. The FBI, who later reviewed the material as part of their cross-state investigation, didn't comment on the missing segment. Instead, they filed it under unrecoverable. But if you know anything about federal investigations, you know that unrecoverable doesn't mean lost. It means classified. So what really happened in those 2 minutes? That's what fans, journalists, and now even documentary filmmakers have been trying to piece together. Because within those missing moments might lie the difference between self-defense and intent, between freedom and guilt, between what really happened and what we were told. When a story hit the media, it immediately split the rap community. Some said it was another example of law enforcement targeting successful black artists, turning their lyrics and lifestyles into evidence. Others believed the system was protecting someone, perhaps a bigger name, an informant, or an unseen hand with influence in the Atlanta nightlife scene. But one fact couldn't be ignored. The FBI's version of events was too clean, too polished, too perfectly framed to fit a headline. That's when people started digging. Street bloggers and hip-hop analysts began connecting dots that traditional journalists ignored. They pulled up footage from nearby cameras, pieced together fan videos, and even mapped out the timeline using social media posts from witnesses who were there that night. And sure enough, the patterns didn't lie. Between 5:45 and 5:47 a.m., several witnesses claimed they saw two different vehicles pull up to the scene. One of those cars allegedly belonged to someone with ties to the Atlanta music industry, not to Durk or Vaughn. But that part never made it into the official file. So now, the question became, why were those 2 minutes removed? Was it an error in the footage or a deliberate decision to control the narrative? Because if those 2 minutes showed someone else arriving or someone else firing a weapon, that could completely change the outcome of the case. Durk always maintained his innocence. From the beginning, his focus wasn't just on proving he didn't pull the trigger. It was on proving that the system had already made up its mind before he stepped into court. In interviews, Durk never said much about the missing footage. He let his lawyers speak for him. But his silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. He understood that when the FBI's name gets attached to a case, the rules change. It's not about truth anymore, it's about control. And yet, despite the chaos, Durk continued to rise. While the world debated those 2 minutes, he was on tour, releasing albums, and building his label. It was almost as if he knew that the truth would eventually come out. That time would expose what those minutes tried to hide. As the court process dragged on, fans started piecing the story together themselves. Screenshots, reports, and leaked snippets of the surveillance footage began circulating online. And although none of it showed the full picture, one thing was clear: the missing section wasn't random. It was surgical. It cut out exactly the portion where key movement was supposed to happen. That's not an accident. That's intention. And if that's true, then maybe the FBI didn't just miss those 2 minutes. Maybe I didn't want you to see them. When the FBI first presented the timeline of the shooting incident outside the Varsity, it looked neat and convincing. According to their version, Lil Durk and King Von arrived together. An argument broke out, shots were fired, and a man was injured. Everything seemed to be captured on surveillance cameras. But when the defense team and independent analysts studied the raw footage closely, something was in. The timestamps jumped from 5:45 a.m. to 5:47 a.m., skipping 2 full minutes of real time, right at the height of the altercation. 2 minutes gone, no explanation, no backup copy, just silence. The FBI called it a technical malfunction, saying the data between those frames was corrupted beyond recovery. But to people familiar with forensic video analysis, that explanation made little sense. Digital corruption doesn't erase an exact section so cleanly. It distorts frames, it freezes pixels, it stutters. But it doesn't create a perfect 2-minute blackout. That's not error, that's editing. Someone had intentionally removed a portion of time, and that missing piece wasn't just random. It covered the exact moment when witnesses said the gunfire began. In the courtroom, prosecutors relied heavily on that same edited footage. They argued that Lil Durk was seen raising his arm as if holding a gun, but the footage froze before any actual shot was visible. Then it jumped ahead to the aftermath, a wounded man on the ground and people fleeing. The defense immediately objected, asking to see the full, unedited version. The response from investigators was short: there is no full version. That moment left the courtroom tense. Even journalists covering the trial noticed something strange. Why would an FBI-involved case have incomplete evidence? Why was no backup drive ever produced? Fans online began digging for answers. Street reporters and hip-hop bloggers started comparing different angles from nearby surveillance systems. Some clips from parking lots, nearby restaurants, and even fan-recorded Instagram lives started surfacing. And surprisingly, several of those videos captured what looked like a third vehicle pulling up to the scene right before the camera cut off. This car didn't belong to Durk, Vaughn, or the victim. The inconsistencies didn't stop there. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. One claimed to have seen Durk run from the scene before shots were fired. Another swore they heard gunfire while he was still standing beside Vaughn. The police report, however, seemed to cherry-pick the versions that matched their narrative. It painted Durk as a central participant while ignoring testimonies that placed him away from the weapon. But without those missing 2 minutes, nobody could prove anything either way. And that's exactly why those minutes matter. They represent the gray area where truth and control collide. Lil Durk's legal team argued that this gap created reasonable doubt, the foundation of every defense. If the footage doesn't show the moment of the shooting, how can the prosecution claim certainty? Yet, for reasons no one fully understood, the court allowed the edited video to remain in evidence. The FBI stayed quiet, refusing to comment further. Some insiders whispered that the footage wasn't destroyed but sealed, meaning it still existed in a classified database, withheld from public release due to ongoing federal reviews. That explanation only deepened the mystery. What federal review? And why hide 2 minutes from a public trial? As months passed, the narrative online began to shift. Fans stopped treating it as just another rap case and started viewing it like a potential cover-up. The phrase "missing 2 minutes" turned into a symbol, a digital scar representing how evidence can vanish when power is involved. And through all this noise, Durk remained calm. He didn't rant online. He didn't release statements. He simply said in one interview, "The truth always circles back." That single sentence became one of the most quoted lines in hip-hop discussions that year. Behind the scenes, more rumors spread. Some claimed the missing footage implicated another individual tied to Atlanta's underground scene, someone with connections that reached both law enforcement and the music industry. Others believe the cut was made to protect a confidential witness who appeared in the frame. No one could confirm either theory, but both made sense in a world where silence often means safety. Meanwhile, Durk kept building his empire, focusing on music and leadership within ODF. His actions spoke louder than words, as if he knew one day those 2 minutes would return and the truth would finally speak for itself. In the end, that gap in time became one of the most talked about mysteries in modern rap history. 2 minutes, one clip, a missing link that changed how people saw the system. Some call it a mistake, some call it manipulation. But those who followed the case closely know better. Because when something disappears in an FBI file, it's never truly gone. It's hidden. And that's the difference between the story we're told and the story that really happened. When the FBI formally stepped into Lil Durk's case, everything changed. The local police had already gathered their evidence, taken statements, and built what looked like a straightforward shooting investigation. But once the federal agents arrived, the narrative suddenly tightened. Documents were sealed, statements withdrawn, and reporters who had been covering the case daily found themselves locked out of briefings. It was as if a quiet order had been issued. No more leaks, no more discussion, no more details about those missing 2 minutes. At first, the move made sense. When the FBI joins a case, it usually means there's an interstate element, maybe weapons crossing state lines or federal offenses. But as the weeks turned into months, the silence became suspicious. No public updates, no mention of progress, no explanation about the corrupted footage. Even court transcripts began redacting certain sections under the phrase "protected investigative content." For anyone paying attention, that wanted the world to see. Behind closed doors, lawyers whispered that an informant file existed, a hidden witness statement that could potentially change the direction of the case. According to whispers within the Atlanta legal community, the witness had ties to someone inside the club scene where the argument first began. If that person appeared in the missing 2 minutes, it could explain everything. why the footage vanished, why federal hands suddenly got involved, and why Durk's defense was being quietly stonewalled. While the mainstream press stayed quiet, independent reporters and YouTube creators began connecting the dots. They noticed the timeline of the footage matched exactly with a second investigation happening that same night in another part of Atlanta, an operation targeting illegal gun distribution. Could it be coincidence? Or did the FBI accidentally capture something in Durk's case that exposed a larger network? The thought alone was enough to set the internet on fire. Forums flooded with theories. Some fans believed the missing segment showed an undercover agent or a cooperating informant on the scene, someone the Bureau couldn't risk revealing. Others argued it might expose misconduct, perhaps a premature shot fired by someone not even connected to Durk or Vaughn. Whatever the truth, the silence was louder than any statement. Because when an agency refuses to speak, it usually means there's something it can't afford to say. Meanwhile, Durk kept moving. His legal battles dragged on, but his career didn't slow down. To outsiders, it looked like he was ignoring the storm. To those who understood him, it was strategy. Every song, every interview, every performance became a chess move. His verses hinted at betrayal, at unseen eyes watching, at truth being cut out of the story. They edited my life, he once rapped, a line fans immediately linked to the case. Whether intentional or not, it fueled the mystery even more. Then came the first real break. King the camera's view. Seconds later, a figure stepped in a frame, holding what looked like a phone, not a weapon. The technician insisted that the angle made it impossible to tell who was who, but it clearly showed more people present than the FBI ever acknowledged. Within hours, his post disappeared. His account was deleted. The thread locked. That disappearance didn't end the conversation. It exploded it. Reddit threads, Twitter spaces, and YouTube comment sections started mapping every possibility. Street insiders from both Chicago and Atlanta weighed in, saying the feds weren't after Durk at all. They were using his case to cover something bigger. Even some legal analysts admitted that the Bureau's choice to classify evidence in a local shooting was unusual, almost unheard of. The question hanging over everyone now was, what's so dangerous about 2 minutes of video that it needs federal protection? As the media ignored it, music did what journalism couldn't. Artists close to Durk began referencing the cut, the gap, the black screen in their verses. It became urban legend, a code phrase representing how systems twist stories to fit their power. 2 minutes they'll never show, one rapper wrote on Instagram. That's where truth lives. The phrase caught fire. Hashtags trended. Memes spread. What started as legal evidence had turned into a cultural metaphor, a digital ghost haunting hip-hop. Through it all, the FBI remained publicly silent. No press conference, no clarification, no update. Every request for comment was answered with the same phrase. We cannot discuss an active investigation. And yet, officially, the case wasn't active anymore. Charges had been addressed, motions filed, evidence reviewed. So why the secrecy? Some journalists speculated that the footage contained something unrelated to Durk's case, perhaps a separate subject the FBI was monitoring. Others thought it exposed inconsistencies in how local police handled the scene. Whatever the reason, the Bureau's refusal to release even a statement confirmed what fans already believed. The full story was being hidden in plain sight. By the end of that year, the missing 2 minutes had become more than just an investigation gap. It was now part of Durk's mythos, the invisible proof of how far power will go to shape a narrative. And while the agencies stayed quiet, the people didn't. Every discussion, every reaction video, every street conversation added new layers to the mystery. Because once silence becomes too perfect, it stops sounding like professionalism and starts sounding like fear. And that's exactly where the story begins to turn. When something is buried, it's only a matter of time before someone digs it up. And that's exactly what happened with the missing 2 minutes. Months after the story seemed to have gone quiet, whispers began to move through underground forums and encrypted group chats. Someone claimed to have access to a partial copy of the original security footage. Not the edited one shown in court, but the raw version before the gap appeared. No one knew who this person was. Some said it was a former data analyst. Others said it was an intern who copied a drive before it was sealed. Whoever they were, they had set off a storm. At first, the leak wasn't public. A few screenshots appeared, grainy, low quality, impossible to verify. But even those frames told a different story. In one, Durk was clearly seen standing several feet away from the commotion near a car door. In another, someone else, wearing a similar hoodie, was positioned closer to where the shots would have been fired. These images didn't prove innocence or guilt, but they raised new questions. Questions the FBI had avoided for years. If this footage was real, it meant that the missing 2 minutes weren't gone at all. They had been hidden. By the time the screenshots spread to Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, it was too late to contain them. The clip was out. Channels started uploading breakdowns, comparing each frame to the official footage released by the Bureau. Independent analysts lined the two versions side by side. The cut was obvious, the timing exact, and more importantly, the missing minutes didn't just show a change in position. They showed different people altogether. That's when everything exploded. The FBI still refused to comment, but their silence only made it worse. Hip-hop media outlets started picking up the story again. YouTubers began crafting hour-long breakdowns. Journalists revisited court records, searching for inconsistencies. And everywhere you looked online, one phrase echoed louder than ever. They hid the truth. Durk didn't respond publicly, but the people closest to him began to speak. Associates from ODF hinted that every story has two sides, and that the real footage tells its own tale. These cryptic comments kept fans on edge. Some believe Durk had known the truth all along, that he had kept quiet because legal teams were working behind the scenes. Others thought he was playing chess with the industry itself, letting the world talk while he focused on legacy. Behind the scenes, lawyers started refiling evidence requests. Motion after motion was submitted for full disclosure of all unredacted materials. But each time, the requests were denied under the same reasoning. Material is classified for security review. The phrasing baffled legal experts. Why would a local shooting case be classified for national security reasons? Unless, of course, the footage captured something that connected to a federal operation happening nearby. That theory began to gain traction online, and soon the missing 2 minutes weren't just a mystery. They were a potential scandal. Fans started treating the investigation like an internet crime series. People mapped Google Street View of the area, drew diagrams of where each person stood, analyzed headlights, and compared reflections from nearby windows. The community had turned into detectives, trying to fill the blanks that law enforcement left open. And every new detail uncovered made the Bureau's official version look thinner. The cultural effect was massive. Rap lyrics started referencing the blacked-out minutes. Documentaries, reaction videos, even podcasts began discussing how much of modern hip-hop is shaped by hidden truth and selective storytelling. The case of Lil Durk had transcended the courtroom. It had become a mirror reflecting how institutions could reshape reality through silence. Meanwhile, Durk's silence became its own language. Each time he stepped on stage, fans screamed his name with a sense of defiance, as if celebrating not just his success, but his survival. To them, he wasn't just the voice of the streets anymore. He was proof that you can be targeted, framed, doubted, and still come out on top. The missing footage had turned him into a symbol, not of crime, but of control, of how systems manipulate, and how legends rise above manipulation. Then came a twist that no one expected. A former investigator, speaking anonymously to a podcast, admitted that there were multiple versions of that footage. He didn't confirm what was inside the gap, but he confirmed something else. Not every file that leaves the Bureau is identical. That statement alone changed everything. It meant that the public footage, the one used in court, might have been a sanitized version of the truth. The admission reignited every theory. Some believed the hidden frames showed a confidential informant. Others thought they revealed a second firearm that didn't belong to Durk or Vaughn. Whatever the truth, the implications were enormous. If proven, it wouldn't just clear Durk's name. It could expose a chain of manipulation inside the investigation itself. By the end of that week, major outlets could no longer ignore the story. They began reporting on the leaked footage controversy, though carefully, without naming sources. But the internet had already moved faster than the news. For millions of fans, the verdict was clear. The 2 missing minutes were not a glitch. They were a choice. And for Lil Durk, that choice defined everything. His silence, his strength, and his survival. Because sometimes, not speaking isn't fear. It's strategy. By the time the leaked clips made their way around the internet, one thing had become clear. The world wasn't waiting for the FBI anymore. The streets had already made up their mind. Lil Durk wasn't just a rapper under investigation. He had become a symbol of resistance against a system that picks what to show and what to hide. And those missing 2 minutes were now legendary. For the first time in years, the conversation shifted away from guilt and innocence toward truth itself. What was being hidden and why? Every time Durk stepped on stage, the crowd's energy carried that question in their chants. The truth will surface, one fan wrote online. Even if they try to delete it, the streets keep receipts. Across YouTube, new creators and independent journalists started revisiting the case. Channels began decoding transcripts, rewatching evidence, comparing witness statements frame by frame. Among them, one voice stood out: Rap Shock, the channel that refused to just repeat the headlines. Instead of chasing clicks, Rap Shock broke down timelines, analyzed footage, and gave voice to what fans really felt. That something about the FBI story didn't sit right. Viewers started trusting Rap Shock because it didn't treat hip-hop as gossip. It treated it as history. Every detail, every pattern, every missing second became a clue. The story wasn't just about Lil Durk anymore. It was about how truth bends under power and how silence can speak louder than words. Meanwhile, Durk's silence had taken on a new meaning. He wasn't running from the truth. He was letting the truth build itself. His music became his courtroom, his verses his testimony. When he rapped about loyalty, pain, and survival, listeners heard layers beneath the words. They heard the story of a man who had faced systems meant to destroy him and outlasted them. Industry insiders began to shift their stance. Journalists who once dismissed the case now revisited it with caution. Even rival artists, who had stayed quiet before, started acknowledging how Durk had handled everything with discipline and control. His composure made him more dangerous than any diss, because real power doesn't shout, it endures. Behind the scenes, new whispers began circulating, that the missing 2 minutes had resurfaced privately, that lawyers were working to unseal them, that federal pressure was building to keep them contained. None of it was confirmed, but it didn't have to be. The energy online had changed. People no longer cared about the official version. They wanted the real one. And that's exactly what Rap Shock stood for, exposing the raw, unfiltered stories the mainstream avoided. The channel's uploads became a hub for discussion, breaking down the narrative the way no news outlet would dare. Titles like The Frame Within the Frame and Who Cut the Truth gained millions of views. Comments flooded with theories, eyewitness tips, and heartfelt messages for Durk and Vaughn. Rap Shock wasn't just telling a story, it was giving a generation a voice. Because for years, fans have been told to accept whatever version of reality they were given. But now, through independent creators, that power was shifting. The same way Durk turned pain into purpose, Rap Shock turned silence into investigation. Durk's circle noticed the shift too. The industry realized that no matter how hard they tried to shape the story, people were waking up. Every missing second of footage had now become symbolic, not just for one case, but for every artist who ever had their truth edited, censored, or controlled. It was more than 2 minutes now. It was a movement. When asked about it in a later interview, Durk simply smiled and said, "If they ever show the full clip, you'll understand everything." That line went viral instantly. It was calm, confident, and filled with the kind of power that comes only from knowing the truth is on your side. Rap Shock dissected that quote in a viral upload, pointing out how Durk had learned to weaponize silence. The video broke down how his minimal statements, paired with his focused success, sent a message louder than any press conference ever could. You can't bury what was never dead. That became the tone of a new era. Artists controlling their stories, fans demanding answers, and the truth slowly pushing through the cracks of manipulation. By the time the year ended, the missing 2 minutes wasn't just a case file. It had evolved into legend. People quoted it like folklore. The FBI's silence had done the opposite of what they intended. It had made Lil Durk immortal in the eyes of his people. And as the smoke cleared, one message rang out across every screen, every comment section, every video breakdown on Rap Shock. Truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right voice to reveal it. And that's the truth they never wanted you to hear. The story of Lil Durk's missing 2 minutes isn't just about one man, one case, or one file. It's about how power edits reality and how silence becomes the loudest weapon. Every second they tried to erase only made people look closer. Every question they avoided only made the truth stronger. But here's the thing, this story doesn't end here. The deeper you dig, the more you realize how many layers still remain hidden. And that's exactly what we do here on Rap Shock. We don't just tell stories, we uncover them. We ask the questions mainstream media won't touch, and we bring the truth straight to you, raw and unfiltered. So if you believe truth deserves a platform, if you want real hip-hop journalism, not gossip or clickbait, if you want to understand the stories behind the headlines, then make sure you hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you think those missing 2 minutes really hide. Do you believe the footage was edited on purpose? Or is it something bigger? Something the FBI still doesn't want to reveal? Because the truth won't hide forever. And here on Rap Shock, we'll be right here when it finally surfaces. Stay locked in, stay aware, and remember, in a world full of silence, we amplify the truth.